So, you want to own a shipping port. Buy some land on a coastline, pour concrete, bolt down a few cranes, and collect a fee every time a container gets lifted off a ship. 90% of everything the world trades physically passes through a port at some point, so the money should just show up. It is not that simple. What does a single piece of crane equipment actually cost, and what does it need to earn every single day just to pay for itself? Why did a small island nation hand over a chunk of its coastline to a foreign government for 99 years just to cover a loan? And why did 3 days of missing labor on the U.S. East Coast cost the American economy more than some entire countries produce in a year? Start with the scale of the business. Stack up the different layers that make up port economics globally: terminal operations, marine port services, and port infrastructure investment, and you're looking at a combined industry worth well over $500 billion a year, growing fast as global trade volumes keep climbing and ships keep getting bigger. But almost none of that value comes cheap. A single ship-to-shore gantry crane, the giant machine that lifts containers off a vessel, costs somewhere between $10 million and $40 million depending on size and manufacturer. Chinese-made cranes from ZPMC run $10 to $14 million. European-made equivalents can run past $20 million. A mid-sized American port expanding its crane fleet and berths can easily spend $471 million on a single phase of construction as part of a broader master plan that runs into the billions over 20 years. None of that includes the dredging required to keep channels deep enough for today's massive container ships or the land itself, some of the most valuable coastal real estate on Earth by definition, since a port has to sit exactly where deep water meets a major population center. Here's the unit economics that make the whole machine work. A single active crane moving containers at roughly $75 per lift, 30 lifts an hour, running around the clock at a realistic 65% utilization rate, generates about $35,000 a day. That sounds substantial until you remember a major port runs dozens of these cranes simultaneously, and every single one sits idle, costing money and earning nothing, the moment a ship isn't docked at its berth. But the real profit center in this industry isn't the crane fee. It's what happens when a container doesn't move fast enough. Demurrage charges hit importers when a container sits in the port past its free time. Detention charges hit them when the container itself, owned by the shipping line, isn't returned quickly enough. Between 2020 and 2025, the 9 largest ocean carriers in the world collected roughly $15.4 billion in these charges alone. During the pandemic-era congestion of 2021, the average per container fee jumped 38% globally to $868, and at the busiest American ports, New York, Los Angeles, Long Beach, containers were routinely hit with $2,500 to $2,700 in fees each, close to triple the global average. The business model, in other words, doesn't just profit from cargo moving smoothly. It profits handsomely when cargo gets stuck. Now look at what a port is actually worth as leverage, not just as a business. Sri Lanka spent roughly $1.3 billion building Hambantota port on its southern coast, financed largely through loans from China, and the port lost money almost every year after it opened in 2010. By the mid-2010s, Sri Lanka was funneling the vast majority of government revenue towards servicing its debt, and in 2017, it leased a 70% stake in the port to China Merchants Port Holdings for 99 years, in exchange for $1.12 billion, along with a 32-year tax holiday for the operator. Whether this amounted to a calculated debt trap, as Western analysts have long characterized it, or a more straightforward liquidity deal, as Chinese and some Sri Lankan officials maintain, is genuinely disputed among scholars who've studied the transaction closely. What isn't disputed is the outcome. A foreign state-linked company now controls a deep water port sitting on one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth for essentially a century, because a mid-sized economy couldn't service the debt it took on to build it in the first place. And then there's what happens when the people running a port simply stop showing up. In October 2024, roughly 47,000 dock workers under the International Longshoremen's Association walked off the job at 36 ports across the U.S. East and Gulf coasts, demanding a 77% wage increase over 6 years and a full ban on further automation, against an employer offer of 50%. The strike lasted just 3 days before a tentative truce. Economists at J.P. Morgan estimated it was costing the U.S. economy between $3.8 and $4.5 billion a day. Oxford Economics put the weekly toll as high as $7.5 billion. Those 36 ports handle more than half of all U.S. ocean imports and over two-thirds of containerized exports. 3 days of a labor dispute over pay and robots did more visible damage to the American supply chain than most natural disasters manage in a month. Put those two stories next to each other, and the real business of owning a port comes into focus. It looks, on paper, like a toll booth. Charge a fee per container, collect it forever, let global trade do the rest. But a toll booth that sits at a choke point for nearly all of a country's trade isn't just infrastructure, it's leverage over an economy that depends on it running smoothly and over any government that ever needs to borrow more than it can pay back to build one.